Well, here it is, another video. I honestly didn't think I'd do another one even when the inevitable items like Zellner's motion came up because I've been so busy with so many things that I just assumed I'd be a spectator from now on. Luckily, kinda, there was a lull, and the unfortunate revelation that erupted forth prompted me to begin digging a bit, which frighteningly quickly led to what I'm about to tell you. I may lose listeners on this, but again, these are just theories and ideas. I look at the facts, unbiased, and I put forth the possibilities, but knowing what I know, this is potentially a real game changer. So let's begin. As you may have guessed, I use movies a lot as examples, mostly because people can catch the analogies or points using a movie reference. My favorite movie to reference, of course, is Star Wars because it has so many correlations with so many aspects of life, and pretty much everyone has seen it. There's a scene in Jedi, or Episode 6 for you fellow nerds out there, where the fleet comes out of hyperspace to commence the assault on the Death Star. Second Death Star, you nerds. And Lando says, "We've got to be able to get some kind of reading on that shield up or down." Well, how can they be jamming us if they don't know that we're coming? Click, the light bulb illuminates. Just like when I made certain connections before, this one really got to me, enough to where I'm making another video. Why? Because where this goes, people who walk down that path tend to commit suicide by putting 2 bullets in the back of their own head with a single action revolver, if you catch my drift. I said in earlier videos, well, I think I said, or at least I hope I said, because quite honestly it's been so long and I did so much that I honestly can't remember all of it, which I do apologize for not remembering, but if I can ever divulge my identity, it'll all make sense. But I said in earlier videos that this thing could possibly go all the way to the top. What top? Don't know. But I became concerned when the FBI, the department that investigates whether cops behaving badly get prosecuted, only tested 50%, or 3 out of the 6 samples sent to it, and that Ken Kratz knew that those tests would come back negative for EDTA. That made me think that perhaps we're not only dealing with crooked county law enforcement, but perhaps at the state level and the federal level. Now, that's some scary stuff, but as I recall, I was more focused on pointing out flaws than making absolute connections. Due to who I am and the fact that, for the most part, at least ones that didn't seem relevant to me at the time, which I realize now may be more important than I assumed, no more facts came out and the inevitable ceiling that I predicted was hit. There was no more digging to do, there was no more digging I could personally do, since any digging I'd be doing, especially to see how high up the ladder things went, would probably expose me, and quite honestly, I didn't really see it going there. I thought this was a local mob-type law enforcement agency protecting their gold like a D&D dragon. But the catalyst that started me back down this path was 2 things. Well, there were a bunch of things that I found in the past few days which I hope to possibly do in a separate video, but I'll mention them here a bit later because I do feel that they take the investigation into a new direction, but at the very least it's a different set of evidence to explore. Either way, what I'm going to focus on here is something that no one else is focused on, just like before. As far as I know, anyway. That light bulb clicked and is going to a far out place that, quite frankly, most people don't want to even believe exists. I mean far out. Like, if this was a doobie and a bunch of Woodstock attending hippies and Cheech and Chong were all hanging out, they'd be like, "Whoa man, I'm over it. I'm past baked. I'm on oven clean." The reason I say this is because this gets pretty deep into the weeds. I admit it's an if. And like one of the Bobs in the movie Office Space said, and believe me, it's a big what if. But before I delve into that, I want to say something that at least gets certain paper baggers on board. Paper baggers as in you live in a paper bag, and all you see is what goes by you by looking up. That's your only view of the world. Figuratively speaking, most things happen in life at eye level. So what you see while looking up is rarely the whole picture, and it's a small percentage of what really goes on. That being said, just like the examples I gave before about conversations starting somewhere, this is what really has to happen in order for such things in life to transpire. Remember, I said that no matter what it is, going to a concert, dating, having an affair, 2 guys deciding to burglarize a house, 5 guys videotaping them all assaulting a girl, the Channing Christensen, Christopher Newcomb story where they were kidnapped, killed, cut up, burned, and dumped by 4 guys and a girl, whatever it is, that conversation starts somewhere. 2 girls, 1 cup. That conversation started somewhere. Anytime more than a single person does something, a conversation has to take place in order for any semblance of teamwork to happen in order to accomplish the goal. The reason I have to remain anonymous allows me to be privy to certain things that most people aren't. Add that to the fact that I've learned things over the years and been able to observe things that most people just don't. Be it they're too busy, they don't care, whatever it is, this talent or skill or curse as it may be, is why I've come up with things in this case that are, as far as I know, unique to me. I kind of do that with everything. Again, it's usually a curse more than anything, like Michael Clark Duncan's character in The Green Mile. Usually I notice things, point out the problem, tell them to fix it, it doesn't get fixed, and the bad things I said would happen. So it actually kind of sucks. Which is why I remain aloof, because I hope they don't drag me away to the funny farm or somehow say that I was sad and just couldn't take it anymore. I assure you, for the record, if I ever off myself, it's because a bad guy just went down too, and I'm in Avery's shoes. If I have a terminal disease, I'll be sure to have my affairs in order and let y'all know. Otherwise, it's a hit. But something I've come to realize is that the majority of people are controlled in some way, shape, or form by a select few. Most people just don't take the time to think, or probably don't want to think, that that's the way the world works. Always has. Only in this information era, it has some distinct differences. We don't serve a king or a pharaoh, but we do serve someone. Think of your own neighborhood organization. If they don't like your distracting garden, they somehow, well, now anyway in today's society, seem to be able to have the ability to make you take it down. Like the one guy in Nashville who had that zombie statue coming out of his garden, Claude, get it, Claude, the zombie clawed his way out of the ground into the garden, had to remove his statue because his neighbor said so. That's his property, yet it had to go. Look at corporations. One of Wisconsin's largest corporations, Johnson Controls, which just recently moved to Ireland for tax purposes due to a merger, also just laid off a bunch of workers from its Milwaukee location. Johnson Controls, according to Wikipedia, employs over 170,000 people worldwide on 6 continents. If you take the population of Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the Packers, the only Wisconsin NFL team, Wisconsin's 3rd largest city, and added the population of Green Bay at 105,000 with Calumet County, Wisconsin, the entire county, at 48,000, you still wouldn't have the same amount of people that Johnson Controls employs. That includes babies born today and people over 100. Everybody. If you take Green Bay and add it to the population of Manitowoc County, and you'd have Johnson Controls beat by about 15,000 people. That's only about a third of the seating capacity of Miller Park where the Milwaukee Brewers play baseball. Of those Johnson Controls corporate decisions I just mentioned that affects hundreds of thousands of people, people who may have to change vacation plans for this layoff or skimp on Christmas gifts this year for their kids, how many people do you think were involved in that decision that affected so many? You got the CEO, COO, CIO, CFO, the alphabet soup level, a handful of VPs, maybe, and the board of directors. What is that, 50, 20, maybe 12 people? Those few people made a decision that affected so many. Now take your government. Let's take an issue that most people are torn about, smoking. Sure, it's bad for you, but does the government really have the power to tell people and business owners, except casinos of course, that they no longer have the ability to choose for themselves whether or not to allow smoking in their own establishments, on their own property? Well, if they can get rid of Claude, then what's stopping them? But the point is, how many people were involved in that decision? 40 out of 50 states have some form of smoking ban, usually minus casinos. 40 of the 50 states say that you can't smoke indoors at a business or in public areas. How many people were involved in that decision? Take Wisconsin, for example. Wisconsin has a state assembly and a state senate, 99 members in one, 33 in another. Add the governor, and that's how many people it takes to pass a bill, so 133 to vote on it. Add the lawyers, staff, and lobbyists, of course. Casinos weren't exempted by chance. That maybe would, at the high end, bring the total to, what, 300 people? 200? Now take the people who didn't just vote on it. Take the people who came up with the idea. The people who actually drafted the bill. Came up with what it was going to say, what rules it had in it, and exemptions, of course, for casinos. Now you're talking, what, 30, 20 people? That minute number of people told 5,770,000 people that no matter what, you can no longer light up indoors or at public places because we said so. Think about that. The few tell the many what to do. I mention that because of what I'm about to divulge. We'll still have people saying, well, this is different. I assure you it's not. I don't conceal my identity for kicks. In fact, it would probably be to my advantage in a lot of cases if I were to tell you. But while not swimming saves you from shark attacks and drowning, you now have to worry about the big bad wolf. I've said before that art mimics life and life mimics art. In the movie Her Alibi with Tom Selleck and Paulina Porsakova, he's a writer with writer's block, and he's sitting on a courtroom bench with other writers because they're all trying to get ideas for their books as people shuffle in and their criminal cases are divulged because truth really is stranger than fiction. Like Skylar White in Breaking Bad, where she goes back to work and finds out her boss Ted is cooking the books, or my favorite example, the Law and Order episode Old Friends, where the CFO of a baby food company is murdered and it turns out that the mob is involved. The mob, in order to save some money, had the company use moldy fruit in the food and a baby died because of it, which led to the investigation and the rabbit hole that led to The Top. And Assistant DA Ben Stone gets the CEO of the company to reluctantly tell the truth on the stand, and on the way out of the courthouse, she's assassinated. That's what I'm trying to avoid by telling us. I'm hoping that me saying this will put me into the position where me speaking out about this kind of puts me into Avery's position to where they can't knock me off because it'll look too obvious. The people who I'd be concerned about in this situation seem not to care about such menial things, but the alternative is kind of what Avery had, which isn't really all that great of an alternative, which is bogus charges in a rigged system and prison. Well, I'll tell you right now, that ain't happening. I go out blazing, just so you crooked cronies out there know. Only, I don't know who's crooked, because of revelation number 1. I know Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office is, but I don't know who's in the game and who's honest. Like the light switch going off, one move started me down this path which led to what I'm about to say. But like those examples, art mimics life, and a light bulb went off, which led me here. The thing that got me back on this case was the federal judge basically freeing Brendan Dassey. I didn't really expect that, but when it happened, I thought for sure that Wisconsin Attorney General Brad Schimmel would know better than to appeal this case with such flimsy evidence and an almost certain loss when Zellner's done. Then again, I thought, well, knowing what I know, maybe he's doing the old, everyone needs justice, including the Halbach, so I'll at least make a motion, futile as it may be, to make it look like I tried. Well, that was quickly overshadowed by the realization that, well, how can they be jamming us if they don't know that we're coming? No one really delved into Brad Schimmel before. Well, some actually did, but no one really paid much attention to it, including me. I mean, for the most part, why would they? He was the DA for Waukesha County and worked for Waukesha for 24 years, right out of law school, and had nothing to do with the Avery case. Plus, as aforementioned, there was an evidence ceiling since every Avery internet sleuth spelunked sphincters of untold numbers to the point where every lead was pretty much exhausted. Everyone was basically going through the end of the solitaire deck for the 4th time, hoping that they just might have missed a combo that would allow them to continue the game. Now, I knew Brad played bass. Hell, he played at his own victory party. And I understand that cops, lawyers, prosecutors, teachers, they're people too. Just like Warden Joe Caputo from Orange is the New Black in the band Side Boob, they're just people too. So what, he's in a band. Well, it soon came out that he was in a band many years ago with none other than, you guessed it, Kenneth R. Cratcherpants. I know Brad played bass, but I don't know what Kratz played. Maybe the skin flute, rusty trombone, the nail her in the stink tuba, but there they both were in the promotional band pick for the band Alibi. Clever guys, but not really. But when I saw that, I started peeling back the Band-Aid, get it? Band-Aid, that I thought would only be removed by Dr. Zellner. That was the first of the 2 incidents that led to this video. That flicked the light bulb that said, maybe there's a little bit more here than just the contained cacophony of corruption in little old Manitowoc County. My question is, how the hell were they in a band together when Kratz was in La Crosse, Wisconsin, until '92, when Brad Schimmel had only been practicing law for 2 years? La Crosse is about a 3-hour drive from Waukesha, Wisconsin. Then, in '92, Kratz gets appointed to the DA position for Calumet County, and Calumet is almost 2 hours from Waukesha. I can't imagine that those counties had so little to do that these guys had so much free time to be in a band together 8 to 10 years after the younger Schimmel began practicing law. He's got kids, so I don't know how he would have talked the wife into that one. Regardless, apparently they were band buddies. In political races, there's really usually only a few scenarios. One is that the area is so swayed one way or another that it's pointless for some parties to run. Basically, whoever wins the primary wins the seat. There are those single-party tickets that are hotly contested. Those usually have people handpicked to walk the plank. Like it or not, that's just the way it is. The other scenario is that nobody really wants it, so people run unopposed. Many judge positions, believe it or not, are that way, as are things like treasurer, clerk, etc. They're cakewalks. You don't do much, but you don't have to deal with the machine. You sit back, slough off, collect your bennies until you have enough time to retire. As a taxpayer, you're welcome. So when Judge Fox ran unopposed, that's not necessarily a nefarious thing. Could be, but I'm here to tell you that running unopposed certainly does happen, especially for that position. But that's a side note. Schimmel was in a pretty tight race with Susan Happ for the Attorney General job. He ran on two things: dealing with the opiate/heroin problem and dealing with human trafficking. Milwaukee is the hub for human trafficking in the United States, a fact that I would have never known unless I heard him say it. However, not that I've looked lately, but I don't really see how he's done much of anything to battle either. Now, both political sides claim to be tough on crime. It's a strange dichotomy because the law enforcement and police unions are a very powerful lobbying force, at least in Wisconsin. Unions generally lean with the Democrat Party, whereas recent events have the Republicans claiming that they're the real supporters behind law enforcement. Politics makes for strange bedfellows. In fact, just today, I saw a Facebook post of Schimmel showing his support for law enforcement. I'm not taking sides, I'm just stating facts. I too support law enforcement. You have the most thankless job in the world, and it's one of the few jobs where you may not come home at night. But with great power comes great responsibility. If you abuse that power, you should be penalized more severely than anybody else. Which leads us to the Avery case. Now, Schimmel knowing Kratz might just be chance. Schimmel appealing Dassey's freedom may just be chance too. But that's two things. Remember I talked about 3 being a pattern? 1 is existence, 2 is coincidence, 3 is pattern. The brain hamster started running on that wheel, and I began to wonder, what if that goes all the way to the top thing really is a possibility? But man, that would have to involve a lot of people, right? Well, remember how many people decided that you can't smoke? Except casinos, of course. I went through that extensive description for a reason. You have so many things out there, but they're just really bullet points, but they certainly can conglomerate together into a bigger picture if you put them all together in the same stew pot. Manitowoc isn't the only political clusterfunk, okay? There are many things around the state that hint at nefariousness, even if it's just that, a hint. Things like Bob Ziegelbauer, who was the Manitowoc County executive, who was heavily involved in this whole case, but more from behind the scenes, was a member of the Wisconsin State Assembly and a member of countless state-level committees. He also just got recently put onto the state's Commission for Government Reform, Efficiency, and Performance by Governor Walker. That's like Louis C.K. being put in charge of the Pompadour and Tanning Coalition. Kind of like Buting was put on the Avery task force to save the state money, yet somehow someone convinced Avery that Buting would be a good lawyer to pay for to help him lose. Both he and Strang missed some things that even to us sleuths with the electronic glow of monitors in our free time realized that, hey, there probably isn't any sheet music in Stevie Wonder's 83 Corvette. It was like Tweedledee and Tweedledumbass spent months reading the Amish phone directory. I love that bit. But the Attorney General at the time of the Avery rape release and the Halbach trial, Peg Lautenschlager, is now part of the new Ethics Commission for the new agency that oversees elections and pursues ethics violations. Talk about the fox guarding the hen house. This agency was put in place because the nonpartisan GAB, or Government Accountability Board, was so hyper-partisan that it had to be done away with. Look up the Wisconsin John Doe investigation. In fact, this secret investigation just had a leak to a news organization in the UK. after the original judge who greenlit it ordered it shut down because it had no merit whatsoever, and after the Supreme Court of Wisconsin ordered it shut down and ordered all 1 million pages of evidence destroyed because out of 1 million pages, nothing was found to even charge anyone with. If you think the Avery situation is bad, try deal with going to a federal penitentiary or sending an email from the wrong room, which, by the way, really did happen. Yeah, look it up. All for a political witch hunt. And I'm sure the timing of this leak has nothing to do with anything, just like the Halbach disappearance right as the depositions were happening, and Avery got arrested the day that Sheriff Kosurik, second to last only to DA Vogel, was supposed to be deposed. The John Doe information leak comes just a couple of weeks before the U.S. Supreme Court could decide whether or not to take the petition to consider to reopen the case. Otherwise, the Milwaukee DA would once and for all have to end his witch hunt. This petition to the U.S. Supreme Court is almost guaranteed to falter because it has never won its argument, because out of 1 million pages, no law has ever been found to have been broken. It contains a bunch of stuff that he doesn't like, but they're basically in love with Kelso. So when Jackie dumps Kelso and starts riding Hyde, they basically fill their underpants with kale crab cakes of sadness and tears of jealousy. If the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't take the case, then the lower court ruling stands and the investigation is over forever, with no chance ever to continue it or reopening it. Knowing that, the timing of this unfortunate leak is strangely reminiscent of the Avery arrest with the deposition timing. The only reason they even tried that petition was to retain that bogus information to try one last cheap shot during an election year before it got called off for good. The now defunct Wisconsin GAB was an integral part of not only letting this happen, but helping it along. Yet to this day, no one has been investigated or charged with any wrongdoing. The sad part about this is that the GAB was put in place in 2007 to replace the old Wisconsin State Elections and Ethics Board because it was so partisan that it had to be done away with. The GAB couldn't even make it 10 years. And the old Wisconsin State Elections and Ethics Board was swept away by the Milwaukee pension scandal, where some government workers literally walked away with million-dollar pensions. You heard that right, county-level workers having pensions that were in the millions of dollars. To say the least, Wisconsin hasn't really had a great track record of honesty. Can you understand why I'm hiding my identity? The sad part is, I could go on. And I haven't even gotten to the meat of this yet. This is the salad. This is the preview. Wisconsin has had a pretty shoddy track record of having corrupt politicians, and what's worse, the people who are put in charge of making sure that everyone is on the up and up are the worst offenders. So the behavior of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office is, sad to say, par for the course. Obviously, there are many, many good people out there in law enforcement and politics, but law enforcement and politicians are basically offensive linemen. Nobody notices you until you do something bad, or shall I say are caught doing something bad. Not only do these people get away with it, they keep coming back in some way, shape, or form, and usually in a more powerful position. So when I found out that Brad Schimmel, who was supposed to be the Attorney General, who is finally going to be an Attorney General on the straight and narrow, I find out that after he appeals Brendan Dassey's release, he's jam bros with sweaty Kenny Kratz. So I started to dig around a little. I've only been digging for a couple of days. I found those soon-to-be-mentioned pieces like the cabin and the bridge, but there were few things that I found on how Peg Lautenschlager had her hands secretly in every questionable pie throughout Avery's whole ordeal. For those of you unaware of why having her being on the ethics board is ironic, she was busted for being unethical. You heard that right. The lady now in charge of the State Board on Political Ethics was unethical for charging the state mileage for her car that she wasn't even driving to work. She let campaign donors with deceptive business practices off the hook. The letting of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office off the hook wasn't even part of her demise. She also had a drunk driving conviction where she crashed a state-owned car. Granted, it's Wisconsin, and a first-time DUI can happen to anyone, but then to log the miles you never drove. When I started looking at this from an all the way to the top-down perspective, thinking of things like Johnson controls, I began to think back to where I left off. Apparently, Peg Lautenschlager's name and signature is all over this Avery case. Remember I said that all these people in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office act like the Mafia? Even Sean Atwood has said this. They run their tight little town to the point where if you YouTube outsiders talking about the Avery case in bars, people shut up. And the owners come out to the outdoor smoking area and ask you to leave. I looked into some things, or shall I say looked into some things again, and found that there are quite a few tidbits that weren't brought up, at least by me, or delved into that could possibly take this case in a completely different direction. For example, Teresa Halbach's phone pinged a cell tower near Whitelaw about 13 miles away from the Avery place after she left Avery's. So she certainly left Avery's. The fact that, as far as I know, no one looked into Colborne's phone records to find out who, if anybody, but we're pretty certain that he did call somebody afterwards, to find out who he called after he called in the license plate from a personal phone. Was it to call the Go team? Right after Stephen Avery contacted Teresa Halbach for the last time, she activated her call forwarding no answer feature. I've had a cell phone since the late 90s, back when the battery was bigger than the phone and the phone only had 10 LED digits to punch in like kids' toys do nowadays. No text. Voicemail was a relatively new thing, yet I never used that feature. Why would Teresa? It's not like it was the weekend and she didn't want to be bothered. It was Monday afternoon and she'd already done her shoot for the week. It couldn't have been because Avery, or anyone else for that matter, kept calling because he'd already been calling and she'd ignored it. So why would she do that when, if anything, her customer base would be winding down and busy doing other things that evening, like getting things ready for Halloween for the kids to do trick-or-treat, and she herself was planning on going to a party that night? I don't know about you, but my phone would be blowing up. Where you at? Chillin' at the Holiday Inn. Who you with? What we gonna do? What you finna bring to drink, Crook Nuts? I'm already blowed. I finna get blowed some more. So for her to turn her phone off into that mode certainly gives credibility to one of my theories that she's about to disappear, as in a one-way ticket to Fiji. I'm not really going to go too much further into who killed Teresa Halbach, because this video is more about why Stephen Avery's life was made a living hell from way back when until now. But there's other things too, like the fact that the Marabelle Cave Park is right near where that abandoned cabin with the large bear/deer cooker is. That's the park where, even on the stand, Colborne mentions that he and Remaker, again, look who's always in the middle of things, left the search party at Avery's place to go bag evidence that some park patrons found. What evidence? This was mentioned on the stand, yet, as far as I know, I have been going a while, it's evidence that was never mentioned ever again as to what it even was, where it is, not even by the Tweedle defense. Seriously, Buting and Strang are handed a gold relay baton, yet instead of sprinting for the win, they're standing there frozen like Ozzy Osbourne playing whack-a-mole. That park is near the West Twin Rivers Bridge, the bridge where Teresa's car was supposedly seen. That bridge where she would have crossed if she was indeed going to see David Morrow. That bridge where Waldo's arch-nemesis Pam Sturm miraculously found a cell phone. That bridge where that turkey hunter called in because he saw a guy with waiters near a green car by the river near that bridge. By the way, Bobby Dassey was said to be hunting geese. No other hunting season game would you need waiters for at that time of year. Well, near that area also exists the Marabelle Caves Hotel, aka Hotel Hell. This old, rundown stone hotel is supposedly where dark rituals have taken place, be it legit dark rituals, whatever that phrase is worth, or just some teenagers doing some goofy stuff. I say legit because just a few days ago, in Green Bay, Wisconsin nonetheless, a guy found a woman to volunteer to have her finger cut off and to have her blood gathered for drinking in a ritual to honor a dead homie. Aw. Like I said, that conversation started somewhere. And to think, I can't find a woman who does dishes and I cook. I'm sure they'll win the lottery next. And of course, he's a juggalo. Thanks to rump rangers like this, it gives a bad name to an odd but otherwise harmless group of misfits that the federal government classifies as a gang. Gee, I wonder why. Because of this loser's mom pinching this bread rack out of her bitch hole, I'm sure we can look forward to more rules being put in place because Ass Jowls here doesn't listen to Dennis Leary. Make sure you get your whole head in front of the shotgun. Thank you for calling. Thank you for calling. That's neither here nor there, unless the rumors about a secret sex club or that sex cult encompassing the elites of the area happen to be true. Interesting as that always kind of pops up as a possibility. Either way, This hotel is rather special because it was once operated by none other than Alphonse Gabriel Capone. You know, the Mafia mobster. Al Capone had operations everywhere in Wisconsin. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is now a haven for rich fibs. Friendly Illinois buddies. Yeah, right. Kenosha, Wisconsin, right across the state border, and Milwaukee, of course. Miller, Pabst, Schlitz, Blatz, Sprecher, and the Milwaukee Brewers, for crying out loud, all the way up Interstate 43 to Manitowoc, Wisconsin. That hotel was next to a water bottling company. Let's just say it didn't always bottle water. It even had secret underground passages between the two buildings to use for bootlegging. But of all the things I newly looked into, this was the one that started to piece it together. I theorized that in my original videos that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and other local politicians and big shots basically had a tradition of mafia-type rule that didn't die out after Prohibition was ended. Just like the examples of corrupt actions by Wisconsin lawmakers and law enforcement, they're apparently no different. Given that Milwaukee is the hub for human trafficking and the heroin problem is out of control, I would surmise that perhaps the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office was in on a little something, be it drug running, the sex trade, whatever. But I didn't think things like that would be something that could spread out throughout the state without somebody catching on. Hence, I assumed it was rather contained to that area. Well, you see, stuff like this goes on almost blatantly because who's going to do anything about it? Who's going to police the police, especially when you wind up like Stephen Avery? I started looking at the possibility of that when I started seeing that old Peggy was puppet mastering a lot of this. So I looked her up, and that's when the switch was tripped. I saw that she too was once a member of the state assembly. Remember when I said that those people a lot of times are usually handpicked? She beat a 32-year incumbent. That doesn't happen very often. Well, so what? What would she know about running drugs or humans or whatever? I mean, like I said, that conversation has to start somewhere. Where would it start? It would only really start if she was part of something where she would be entrenched in such a thing. Learning how operations work, logistics, geographic considerations, who was part of it, what the law was allowed to do, who were the major players on both sides. Then I saw the first hair-raising fact. While in the state assembly, Peg Lautenschlager was in numerous committees, but I found out that she was the chair of the Drug Enforcement Education and Treatment Committee, along with the Correction Systems Concerns Committee. Drug operations, correction systems. I wonder who had the power to make the call to not let Jody out on that fateful day for her drug treatment meeting. The Attorney General is the top cop in the state. I thought that since Sheriff Peterson was on vacation, the decision would fall to Undersheriff, now Sheriff, Herman, mob man that he seems to be, must have made that call. Well, Peggy being part of those groups, that meant not only would she be entrenched in that existence, she would know all about who was incarcerated, able to be manipulated, blackmailed, all that good corrupt politician resume filler stuff. Then I saw the thing that really made me wonder if I wanted to release this video. Peg Lautenschlager was also apparently the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of the state of Wisconsin, appointed by none other than President William Jefferson Clinton. Interesting. The Clintons? Why would they choose her? That conversation had to start somewhere. Where did that start? That led me to the number 2 reason I'm making this video. I may come to regret this, but I once read a fortune cookie that said, a ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not why ships are built. So I decided to find out more about this. I knew almost nothing of what I'm about to tell you before a few days ago. Feel free to verify whatever you want, but I implore you to put aside all bias before rendering a verdict. As for Peg Lautenschlager's appointment, now before you start whining about how this is some political kabaddi slap fight fest, know that every single president from our current candidate, who happens to be the wife of the man who appointed Peg Lautenschlager, all the way back to Ronald Reagan with the Iran-Contra affair and even Nixon with Watergate, has had something go on that reveals the possibility of really nefarious stuff. Many of the things that are claimed about those presidents are wrapped up in the tinfoil hat conspiracy realm, but Iran-Contra out of any of them is certainly a valid indication that this sort of thing goes on at the highest levels. It's pretty much now valid knowledge that FDR knew about Pearl Harbor, but still, these things always have an untraceable aspect to them. A few people at the top in key positions making things happen. And the media? Watch a documentary on FDR. Notice how few shots there are of him when he's in the wheelchair instead of looking like some dude sitting at a table or in a chair. In fact, there are only 4 seconds of film known to history that even show how FDR walked with his crippling condition. That doesn't happen by accident. I then watched the documentary on things I'd only heard about in passing as a young man. I certainly didn't care at the time, as most young people don't. I voted on the fact that I'm pretty sure he inhaled. Perhaps youth voting shouldn't be so encouraged. At any rate, look up the Mena Airport in Arkansas and you'll realize that there are, or at least were, many government-backed drug-running operations going to fund overseas actions that were supposed to be kept hidden from the public. Most of this was first exposed during the Iran-Contra affair during Republican President Ronald Reagan's tenure. Again, all you need is one nugget of proof that it happened once, and it guarantees the possibility that it could happen again, anywhere, even in little old Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. My original theory had it to where the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office didn't want Avery to go through with this lawsuit because the $36 million on the line is a lot of pension money lost. As I stated from the Manitowoc County Board minutes from earlier that year, the county was in dire financial straits, and the biggest factor of all, just like the character from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, ex-Philly cop Mike Ehrmantraut said, "You know what a cop fears most? More than being shot, more than anything. Prison. Being locked up with all those people you put away. You threaten a cop with that, you make him dangerous." I'd certainly think about doing the unthinkable if my family's homelessness was on the line and my freedom was on the line because of corrupt stuff I did as a cop. I mean, hell, if I was already corrupt, what's one more big corrupt act to save my anus? People are driven by 2 things, pleasure and pain. You strive for pleasure, but you will do anything and everything possible to avoid pain. All animals are programmed this way. So to say that a cop or a law enforcement agency wouldn't collectively do that for self-preservation when they had the resources, knowledge, and means to pull it off is ludicrous. But what if I was looking at this all wrong? In the show Narcos on Netflix, the show about the rise of cocaine kingpin Pablo Escobar, the pilot episode had him talking to the coke manufacturer from Peru. The Peruvian says, "Imagine how much we can get in profit for this if we sell it in Guatemala." And Escobar criticizes him for his lack of vision. He says, "You're not thinking big enough. Forget Guatemala. Imagine what we could get for this in Miami." All you have to do is look at Pablo Escobar as an example and know what people, not even people of power or in power already, are capable of. What if the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office wasn't an autonomous unit? What if they were slanging dope with the help of state and federal officials? Again, it only takes a few key players in key areas to pull this off and cover it up. What if Avery being arrested for the first time was for something else completely different? Perhaps to prevent Gregory Allen from going to jail or talking, or for any number of reasons. Perhaps Allen assaulted Penny Bernstein as a mob-type hit to say, "Hey wench, you better keep your mouth shut about what you know," versus killing her because that would look suspicious, even though offing her would be easier according to what Sheriff Peterson admitted to in an interview about Stephen Avery. What if Avery knowingly or unknowingly knew something about the operation? What if that running his cousin off the road was him threatening to expose everything, or him demanding a bigger cut? Granted, that's wildly hypothetical, which is odd considering the circumstances of this whole ordeal and considering what I'm about to propose, and because Avery probably would have said something by now. Unless they threatened something he wasn't willing to lose, like his mom or his property. Again, people will do everything possible to avoid pain. Regardless, what if this lawsuit wasn't about a $36 million pension loss and a county money loss and to keep crooked cops out of prison? What if the powers that be knew that this lawsuit was going to turn over so many rocks that it would have uncovered a corruption scheme so big that it would make Watergate look like Stephen Hawking trying to claim he had a Freudian slip? Add the fact that with this connection, you may have high-level people that could have been involved, and you've got a serious problem here. I'm just curious as to whether or not Zellner, A, even knows about this possibility, B, knows about it but doesn't want to rock the boat for fear of her own safety and the wrath of these types of people, and instead would be willing to do just enough to basically say, hey, you guys know that you wronged this guy, so free him and nobody looks into anything else. Or C, knows this and she's going to try to go down in history as the lady who broke the biggest government corruption scheme of all time in the world's biggest takedown. If Zellner does that, and she's got the biggest set of Titleist on her that I've ever seen. I mean, that means she'd have some serious fuzz on her peaches. But the reality is that most people who walk down that path end up committing suicide via 2 shots from a single-action revolver to the back of the head, or die in a plane crash. Don't believe me? When I say high level, I mean high level. I started piecing this puzzle together and one name kept coming up like Link did when they started the defense for Stephen Avery. That name was William Jefferson Clinton. And just to quash your first thought here and now, no, I'm not a Trump guy. In fact, I don't like any of the candidates, including third party. That being said, when I mention strange, accidental, and mysterious deaths, go to YouTube and watch the 1 hour 46-minute documentary on Slick Willie. There are many posters of this video. Click on it and at least watch the last 4 minutes where it goes through the list of all the people that mysteriously died being involved somehow with this dynamic duo and how they all inconveniently and accidentally met their early demise. 4 minutes. Even if you break that down into 10-second segments, that's scary. Again, I knew none of this before putting this together just a few days ago. I'm adding this paragraph here and now because the scariest thing of all just happened, just now. I'm writing this in real time, right here, this paragraph. As I'm about to proofread this to time it to see how long it's going to be, I decide to grab a bite to eat. As I was chowing down, I had the aforementioned Clinton YouTube video still up, and I decided to click on a video on the YouTube sidebar just to have something to watch while I was eating because you can't really practice talking about the bullet points you just wrote while your mouth is full of food. I clicked on the video titled The Clinton Chronicles, The Clinton Murders, to see what it was about and to see if it was worth continuing a viewing later on, to which I have to say, it has. But either way, within the first 2 minutes, it mentioned something that made me almost ook my dookers. This bit of information was something I did not know at all. I didn't even know it when I started writing the bullet points for this video. Like I said, this is happening in real time. Keep in mind, I was coming of age when Bill Clinton was elected to office. In fact, the first election I ever voted in, I pulled the lever for old Inhale to the Chief. Every time in school, when we would talk about or discuss law, politics, government, civics, whatever it was, Bill Clinton was an integral part of it. The video stated that Bill Clinton was the only president in history to fire every U.S. attorney in the United States, including the position of the aforementioned Western District of Wisconsin. I knew, albeit recently, that he'd appointed Peg Lautenschlager to that position, which means that her predecessor left in some way, shape, or form, but I never knew how or why. It didn't really matter to me, so I never looked it up. I'm guessing that some of you are old enough to remember this and whether or not that this was true, that he fired every single U.S. attorney. I couldn't believe it, so I looked it up. Sure enough, all 93 U.S. attorneys were quote-unquote asked to resign. In high school, where Clinton was an integral part of the conversation, I learned that every cabinet member for every president signs an undated letter of resignation to be dated by the president if the president ever needs to use it. Basically a big CYA for a president. But this? The article I saw even mentioned that in 2006, when Bush replaced 8 U.S. attorneys, that there was a controversy surrounding that move. Yet replacing them all? Not a peep, apparently. Looks like the media does its best to facilitate the upper echelon staying out of prison, and it appears that it's been doing so for quite some time. I guess that kind of makes sense given today's parallels. Now, I understand that in any administration there's going to be some changeover. And I'm sure that just like in the movie Real Genius, where Kent was naked with the bowl of Jell-O, that he may just have been hot and hungry. But I got to the end of the Chronicle documentary. In the last 10 minutes, just like the first video, they go through 5 minutes worth of names of people who have died under questionable circumstances. 5 minutes. Time that. It's frightening. And it just keeps going and going. The Energizer Bunny be like, deuces, I'm out. I ain't taking a 9 to the skull, yo. Remember I said the conversation starts somewhere. But you kind of have to wonder why an Arkansas state attorney general turned governor, now president, that was accused of running drugs and was able to do so because he controlled the law, a key person in a key position, while he was at that state level, would change the entire guard, change all the attorneys at that level, and not keep a single one. Look up Night of the Long Knives, draw your own conclusions. Yet here I was, theorizing that former U.S. Attorney for Western Wisconsin, Peg Lautenschlager, appointed by Bill Clinton, probably for reasons I hope you're able to surmise by now, turned state assembly rep who chaired a drug committee and a corrections committee, turned state attorney general who expunged Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office of any wrongdoing in the first Avery case, who now heads up the ethics board for the state of Wisconsin, a state that under her has wronged Stephen Avery twice already, 3 times if she has anything to say about it this time around while on the ethics board, who did all that, probably to cover up some activity that's been going on for a very long time and probably under her watch. And here I am, thinking that Peg Lautenschlager simply helped her fellow county-level friends keep their pensions. That conversation started somewhere. I couldn't think of a situation where little old Peggy Lautenschlager would have the opportunity for such an encounter, for such a conversation. Well, learning this, I think now I know where, which kind of makes this crazy scenario not so crazy. I'm just curious as to how many of those 93 U.S. attorneys were picked for the same possible reason. For those of you who doubt that, here's a taste of how modern politics works. The new aircraft carriers that are currently being built has at least one proprietary component of that carrier built in each of the 455 congressional districts in the United States. You think that's by accident? That way, if the military doesn't get the funding it asks for, they have the ability to say to every single politician in Washington, well, not having that carrier means not having that part, which means not having that plant, which means not having those jobs in your district, which means not having those votes and the votes of the workers' friends and families. And the media will be spelunking your sphincter the whole time. Gotta hand it to them. Cunning, but kind of scary. Something I want to point out along those same lines, especially now that you kind of get that very few people are involved in these major decisions. Did you ever notice that you don't have many privately owned large entities anymore? My late grandfather had his money in a bank with the name of the Podunk town he was in on it, Podunk State Bank. Just last year it was bought by the title that'll be similar to the real one, the First National State Bank. I was recently falling asleep to this mid-90s Steven Seagal movie, On Deadly Ground, where he played an Alaska native who worked for the antagonist, Michael Caine, who owned an oil company that was basically polluting the environment for profits. Typical 90s action film, cheesy plot, bad acting, so-so action scenes, environmental twist, the whole Captain Planet craze, that whole thing. That was only 20 years ago, and yet you don't see family names on big companies anymore like Jennings Oil or Milton Steel. It's always a huge corporate conglomerate that has very few people at the top, making decisions for even more people at the bottom. The media is no different. It used to be that you had many different companies owning various enterprises. Now only 6 Goliaths own all of the major media affiliates along with other subsidiary companies that have their hands in untold numbers of pies. Now you have even fewer people in charge of what you, the viewer, see, like Dassey's confession, for instance. In one of the other videos about the dynamic duo, the director's cut brings up a great point related to this. Back in the 80s, just 30 years ago, one generation ago, when you went to Washington, D.C., it was a rather sleepy town. There wasn't the machine I mentioned before. Sort of like what Dave Chappelle talks about in interviews about moving from D.C. for a year and then coming back home to a different world. Now you have scenarios where you have one part of a ship made in each congressional district. 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in the United States border Washington, D.C. You think that's by accident? We are trillions of dollars in debt, and I've always asked, where's this money going? There's always been Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, defense budgets, etc. Now you got bailouts and cronyism, sure. But your lost car keys are statistically more likely to be inside your house and not in your driveway, i.e. the problem is right under your nose and not on the other side of the lake. The now narrow media doesn't tell you this, just like the media sometimes does the exact opposite, like when they told the story about Dassey's confession to taint the future jury pool, which seems to still be lingering even today, and about Avery's prior felony, even though that was buried in Manitowoc County's paperwork and not yet registered with the state database. Bet you didn't know that, did you? That whole leak stemmed from information hidden away in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office evidence locker. So the firearm arrest for Avery happened the day it did because he wasn't listed as a felon in the state database for the cat burning. So when they did the walkthrough under Stephen's permission after Teresa's disappearance, and when they visited Avery for the domestic dispute the year before in 2004, they could have nabbed him then. But they didn't, because he wasn't yet in the system, so technically there was no firearms possession charge to be had. I believe Mama Phoenix had one of her videos state that the firearms charge was added after the fact, which is false imprisonment. So the same person who rifled through and tampered with the blood vial and other evidence that no one but the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office had is the same person who must have leaked that info to the media. They don't tell you that though, do they? An Atlanta videographer and journalist has been researching that and many other political connections since January of this year. I'd advise checking them out. Point is, the media tells their narrative because it either gets them ratings or it gets their bosses favors from high officials. This is something else I'm personally familiar with. Here's something to ponder that director's cut mentioned. Remember when Mrs. Clinton said that when she and Bill got out of the White House that they were broke? Apparently she wasn't kidding. They apparently were actually in debt with all the legal issues and all the Lewinsky scandal stuff, etc. They were actually in the red. Do you know what they're both worth now? Over $200 million. Let that sink in. They have never made or manufactured anything. They've never been salespeople at a high-level company. They've never been part of an IPO. They've written books that have basically flopped, but even a good book will net you what, a few million? Anne Rice's net worth is about $50 million, and she's been writing for quite some time and has had Hollywood make movies from her books. Yet in 16 years, the Clintons have racked up enough dough to be a partner in an NFL ownership. How do you think that happened? Bringing this back to how all this got started in East Central Wisconsin, so what if this was an all the way from the top down mob-type racket that's been going on since Prohibition that got a major boost when a certain drug hit the scene? Dave Chappelle talks about this in his interviews. Does anyone remember what jump-started the War on Drugs Just Say No campaign that Nancy Reagan spearheaded? Crack, a form of, you guessed it, cocaine. Cocaine that top-level people have been running for quite some time that now has a super addictive version that's cheap. Cocaine is for people with some expendable income. Crack is for anyone with a fin. Is anyone old enough to remember what year that was? Dave Chappelle mentions it quite clearly. It was 1985. Does anyone remember what year Stephen Avery was first arrested, which began this whole ordeal? You guessed it, 1985. Marty McFly, forget Gray's Sports Almanac, try Bill's Sports Bag of Crack. Seriously, look into some of this stuff for yourself. Like I said before, if this were a Hollywood movie, it would be the most boring movie in history because if the bad guys have no prospect of ever getting caught, why would you watch it? Hell, that's just a depressing film. But look into things like Clinton's buddy, Vince Foster, who knew basically everything about the Clintons. He and Bill were childhood buds, even better than band buddies like Cratcher Pants and Schimmel. Vince was there for everything, from the cattle futures scandal to Whitewater, to the Rose Law Firm, to the ADFA laundering, Travelgate, Chinagate, Pardongate, Mina, all that stuff. Vince Foster knew it. And like I said, this is all stuff I just learned about within the last few days. Here's one for you. One day, FBI Director, does this sound familiar? FBI Director William Sessions gets a phone call from President Slick Willie Clinton. And like the dismissal of all 93 U.S. attorneys before, Bill Clinton fires the FBI director on the spot. And from what I understand, just like the 93 U.S. attorneys, another first in American presidential politics. Hours later, Clinton's buddy Vince Foster is found in a park, having, of course, committed suicide, and having his house ransacked. The only thing missing from the house, the files he'd kept on the Clintons. and his assistant, while driving home one night, got a 9mm cap through the cranial ass not too long after that. Then, since the FBI is apparently like the Manglords from the movie The Fifth Element, as soon as their leader is removed, everyone turns into a bunch of rectal ventriloquists who have no self-motivating microchip in them. So the FBI, only hours before being competent, was now intellectually disenfranchised, so the park system took over the investigation and concluded that 2 + 2 = potato. Vince Foster committed suicide. Again, I grew up with this guy as my commander-in-chief, and I never heard of anything other than maybe some of these names and titles. So you've got the potential for having the drug trafficking from the top down. What about the other issue facing Wisconsin that the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office could potentially be involved in? The other of the two that current Attorney General Brad Schimmel said that he was going to take care of. Again, perhaps this is all just coincidence, but the Clinton administration with its Chinagate scandal has been giving numerous favors, including an old military base port, to the Chinese. Look up Costco, C-O-S-C-O. Less than 3 weeks after being re-elected, where he was free and clear and didn't have to worry about having to be re-elected ever again, Bill Clinton let Costco, the red Chinese government-blessed company, take over the old U.S. Naval shipyard at Long Beach, California, which, as far as I know, is still the case today. That rabbit hole could go, well, all the way to China. But the reason I bring that up is because some of the people he did business with over there in the Asian market, they have a significant source of income coming from ties to prostitution rings, usually made up of underage girls. Underage girls usually made to develop a drug habit so that they're more easily controllable. This even has a name. It's called a strawberry. Those girls then are promenaded around like a giant sexual square dance to other countries for exploitation. Underage girls being tricked out against their will across international borders. Remember Bring Back Our Girls? Yeah, I'm sure they're real appreciative of all those likes they got since they're all still being traded and assaulted every day of their lives. But I say that just so people understand the reality of that world and that situation. That too has a name. It's called human trafficking. And guess what state holds the city with the #1 spot for such an activity? And guess which state just happens to have a large Hmong population? Wisconsin used to have a bumper sticker that read, "Wisconsin, you're among friends." There was a parody one that said, "Wisconsin, you're among friends," because Wisconsin has a rather large Hmong population. Hmongs who are characteristically staunch defiants of assimilation. Cultures who resist assimilation are more easily controlled from the outside, i.e. the old country, especially if the maintained culture has the type of honor system where certain members of the family are expected to provide for the rest of the family at any cost. This type of thing happens even in the American territory of the Philippines. Young girls are sent from their inland farms to the port towns to work basically as sex slaves. HIV cases are a concern within these communities. There are numerous cases of teenage prostitutes over there getting pregnant by American GIs who not only have to take care of their child on their own, minus what money they have to send back to their family, a child who will never know their father, but the teenage mom has to continue working as best she can, if you catch my drift, throughout her pregnancy and then after, and still send the money she earns home to her family further inland until she contracts HIV and can no longer work. And since medical treatment there, even though it's in American territory, is nowhere near what it's like here, she basically ends up dying a horrible death of an autoimmune disease. And take a wild guess at what that child grows up to become. Sad state of affairs, but that's on U.S. soil, not some faraway third world country. With all that's going on throughout the world, we think we're immune to this underworld that goes on right under our noses. Milwaukee is the nation's hub for human trafficking, and I'd wager that for most of you listening to this is the first time you're hearing of it. As long as these conversations have a place to start and a path to connect to the action, you have the distinct possibility of making the improbable possible. Knowing what you now know about a few key people in key positions controlling things, is it that far-fetched to think an ambitious woman from central Wisconsin becomes a lawyer and then becomes a DA for a county who's near a county who acts like the mob because their prohibition-style mob rule never ended, but because it's a small town, nobody really notices, nobody really says anything because technology isn't there to really say anything. Anyone in a close community kind of stays that way in their close community. I think it's 37% of the people never leave their hometown, and 70% of the people in the United States don't move any further than 5 or 10 miles from where they grew up. But you take somebody like that who then gets into state politics, a state that isn't really all that great at not being corrupt, and chairs a drug committee and a corrections committee, who then gets noticed by certain people in that organization who then have ties to other people at the top, gets appointed to U.S. Attorney for the western part of Wisconsin, because of that gets catapulted to Attorney General, where she's a key person in a key position to do basically anything that she wants as long as she doesn't get caught, like an offensive lineman. You look at that scenario and tell me that there isn't a distinct possibility that this is what the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office is trying to cover up with the Avery lawsuit. Add that on top of a neglectful, naive, and possibly bought-off media, and there's practically nothing that they can't get away with, especially in the court of public opinion. Remember Brendan Dassey? He had his story blasted all over, and people to this day believe it. There's a local talk show host in Milwaukee who actually, as far as I know, still holds the record for most podcast downloads on iHeartRadio, iHeartMedia's webpage for rebutting a murderer. Basically, a lot of the people in the media are saying, well, these two people from New York, these two ladies, are basically just making stuff up, and it's a one-sided story, even though nobody ever volunteers on the other side to give their side of the story. But you even have the media on it saying things that we're all basically debunking here in our free time with the soft glow of our monitors lighting our way. And the real kicker for this, the thing that I'm pretty sure everybody forgets, all of this, every single portion of this, from what we have right now, all these theories, all these Reddits, all these news organizations, articles, everything, none of this would ever have been known if it weren't for two ladies who were just curious and trying to make a video for a class that came here and documented this over years. None of this would ever have come to light. All this nefarious, no matter how small it really is or how large it really is, none of it would have ever been known by anyone, and these two men would be sitting in jail until they cease to exist. And Brendan, I'm pretty sure Brendan has never had the one thing that we all strive for, and that's human companionship. That poor boy would have been robbed of this forever if it weren't for that small fact. Think of every evil little twist that we know of or theorize, and then think what could possibly be out there that we have no idea about. Like I said before, all this could be just grasping at straws, but knowing what I know, the parts I can't tell you, it's becoming less and less likely. And this is just adjoining what I know to what I've found out in the last few days. I know this is pretty far out there, but imagine this is a medical situation. We all probably know somebody with a medical condition that the doctors just can't quite pin down. Wouldn't you rather have somebody explore all possible options? Now think of sitting in prison. Wouldn't you rather have somebody explore all avenues to get you out? So, wild as this may be, it doesn't hurt to at least eliminate it, right? Anyone care to try? Yeah, that's what I thought. If I am correct, and this is something that goes higher, goes to the top, and is not just some random coincidence that the cops made work for them, which, again, statistically, with the patterns, with what I know, I just can't see that happening. Is it possible? Sure. It's the luckiest possibility that they could have had, in which case they botched it completely. Ray Finkel would be hooting and hollering saying, hey, at least they're not looking at me anymore. But if I am right, one of two things are likely to happen. One is that people are going to start going down like Tracy Lords in the 80s. And you might have people being cured of that nasty oxygen habit they have, usually by committing suicide with a couple of bullets to the back of the head from a single-action revolver. Or you're going to have a cover-up like nothing you've ever seen before. It'll make Watergate look like a dick pic from Carlos Danger, along with people being cured of that nasty oxygen habit by committing suicide by taking 2 bullets to the back of the head from a single-action revolver. So either way, you're probably going to see something of that caliber. No pun intended. I hope that the powers that be, if this really is something that intimidates them, just write this off as ramblings of a kooky conspiracy nut. But I've got enough people around the world in multiple countries who I trust, who know who I really am, so that if something happens to me, y'all are going to hear about it. Whether any of us at this point in time can do anything about it is another story. But from what I know, what I've seen, what I've read, as long as we've got paper currency and no ID chips, we still got a chance to oppose pretty much anything. But you've got to be willing to fight. If this corruption and evil does manage to start encompassing us, then we've got to fight for it, because if that does happen, know that the Braveheart quote about William Wallace, "Any history is written by those who would hang heroes," rings true. There is no sacred ground for the conquered, and I truly hope I'm wrong. I also hope that Avery goes free. Then I can tell y'all who I am, and we can close the cover on this horrible chapter in history. I really do feel that Avery's chance hangs on Attorney General Brad Schimmel's decision on whether or not to investigate the John Doe League. If he does, I honestly think there won't be a prosecution unless it involves some peon. I think that if that happens, it will, which is still sad to say because that means the real culprit will go free. I think that someone in the DA's office will either have to have been told to do it or will just be thrown under the bus as a patsy and no one will believe them. So Stephen Avery all over again. If that's the case, it will do nothing but protect the real culprits from going to jail, just like Stephen Avery. So watch out for that and question everything. Don't believe what you're told in the media. Do your own homework, just like we did here. It seems you only go to jail if you're not one of the chosen few. If Schimmel doesn't prosecute a group that has put innocent people behind bars already and has made his own party suffer a great deal, yet will appeal Brendan Dassey's release, then both Dassey and Avery are screwed. If he chooses to not even investigate after his own party has formally requested an investigation, then knowing what I know, we're all screwed. Hard, unlubed, and wrapped in sandpaper. And just like the aircraft carrier with parts made in all 455 congressional districts, this feed the political machine travesty has only been going on for a single generation. But beware, history is bullet points, as is your life. You'll all have your own bullet points: birth, graduation, marriage, children, retirement, death. Those are the only things that will be known about you in 200 years. Nothing of how any of it came about will ever be known or told. You graduated, but what was your GPA? You got married, but how did you meet? You had kids, but did one of them wet the bed till they were 8 years old, or suck their thumb, or have ADD? None of that will ever be documented or survive. So remember that, and remember that in some cases there is no tomorrow. Hitler didn't win elections on a Tuesday and start loading up trains on a Friday. It happens over time. But you must see it as it's happening and do something about it. This political machine has only been really going on for one generation. But remember what Ronald Reagan said: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed to them so that they may do the same. For if you don't do this, and if I don't do it, one day, you and I will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in America when men were free. The rest will suffer the fate of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, and the system that is designed to protect us will be our own undoing, as we drink our beer, in our jerseys, cheering for that touchdown, or planning on how to make that outfit Kim Kardashian had on a reality for work tomorrow, and to TiVo that cooking show to be able to try out that new chili dip for next week's game. Help us, Obi-Wan Zellner. You're our only hope.